Clara stood by the kitchen window, the gray clouds pressing down on the world outside, feeling the weight of the secret she had carried for years, a secret that made her heart race and her hands tremble, because tonight she knew she could no longer hold it in. Tonight she had to tell James, the man she had loved with all her heart, the man who had laughed at her silly jokes, who had held her hand when life felt heavy, who had been by her side through every small victory and every minor heartbreak, the man who had become a father in every sense to her little girl, Lily, even though Lily's existence was tied to a truth he didn't know, a truth Clara had buried beneath years of love, care, and quiet fear, and now she felt that fear like fire in her chest, knowing that revealing the truth could either break them or finally set them free, and she looked down at the photograph in her hand, the one where Lily's eyes sparkled like sunlight through leaves, her tiny hands clutching a stuffed bunny, her smile innocent and trusting, and Clara's throat tightened as she imagined telling James that Lily was not his biological daughter, that she had made choices in the past that he had no part in, choices that now demanded honesty, and she thought of the nights she had laid awake beside him, feeling his steady breathing, imagining what it would be like if he found out, imagining the way his eyes would widen, the way his voice might tremble, the anger, the hurt, the heartbreak, the disbelief, all the possibilities swirling in her mind like a storm, but she also imagined the relief she would feel after confessing, the lightness of no longer carrying a secret that had grown heavy like stone in her chest, and she pressed her lips together, her hands gripping the edges of the photograph as if it were a lifeline, feeling the tiny heartbeat of her daughter echo through her fingers, reminding her of what was at stake, reminding her that this truth, no matter how painful, had to be told for Lily's sake, for James's sake, and for her own, and finally, after pacing the kitchen for what felt like hours, after staring out at the rain and the empty streets and imagining the look on James's face, she picked up her phone, the screen lighting up her anxious face, her thumb hovering over the send button as if it were a trigger for an unknown explosion, and she typed, over and over, the words that seemed impossible to speak aloud, "James, we need to talk, it's about Lily." And she deleted, and typed again, "James, there's something I need to tell you, something important about Lily, please come home," and each time her finger trembled, each time her chest tightened, but eventually, she hit send, and the message flew across the invisible wire between them, carrying her fear, her hope, her desperate wish that he would understand, that he would listen, that he would not leave. And then she dropped the phone onto the counter, her body leaning against it as if it were the only support in a world that suddenly felt unsteady, and she listened, straining for any sound of his reply, any indication that he had read her words and was coming, anything. But there was nothing except the relentless ticking of the clock and the soft patter of rain against the window, a rhythm that matched the pounding of her heart, each beat a reminder that the moment of truth was coming, that soon, the life she had known, the home she had cherished, the love she had built with James, might change forever, and she hugged the photograph to her chest, closing her eyes for a brief moment to imagine him walking through the door, his expression unreadable, his steps careful, his eyes searching hers, and she imagined telling him everything, every detail, every fear, every reason she had kept the secret hidden, and she imagined the tears that might fall, the questions he would ask, the hurt he might feel, but also, deep down, she imagined the possibility that love might survive. That the bond they had forged, the trust, the laughter, the late-night talks, the quiet morning sipping coffee together, the way he had taught her to dance in the kitchen when no one was watching, the warmth of his hand on her back, all those moments might be strong enough to endure the truth, and that thought, fragile and delicate as it was, gave her a tiny spark of courage, enough to stand there, enough to wait, enough to hope, and she whispered to herself, almost as a prayer, almost as a plea, "Please, let him come, let him understand, let love be bigger than this secret." And she didn't move, she didn't eat, she didn't speak, she just waited, the rain falling, the clock ticking, and her heart holding on to that small, trembling hope, knowing that in the next few hours, everything might change, and fearing, yet longing, for what that change would bring. James arrived at the house that evening with a mix of confusion and tension weighing on him, his steps hesitant as he crossed the familiar threshold, the sound of the door clicking behind him echoing unnaturally in the quiet room, and Clara met him in the living room, her hands clutching each other nervously, her eyes wide and pleading, ready to spill the truth she had carried for so long, the words ready to tumble out before her courage could falter, and she began, her voice trembling but firm, "James. Lily, she isn't biologically yours," and for a moment, the world seemed to pause, the words hanging heavy in the air, pressing down on both of them as if time itself had stopped, and James froze, his expression a mixture of disbelief, hurt, and confusion, his lips parting slightly as he tried to grasp the meaning, the impact of what he had just heard, and Clara rushed on, trying to explain herself, her reasons, the love that had never wavered, the life they had shared, the nights she had stayed awake worrying about when the right time would come, the fear that he would leave, the hope that he would understand, the desperation that every word carried, but James only shook his head slowly, stepping back as if physical distance could shield him from the pain, and Clara reached out instinctively, but he did not take her hand, and she felt her heart shatter in a way that words could not capture, feeling the gap between them widen, the trust that had once been unshakable now fragile, and she remembered all the moments they had shared, all the laughter, the gentle touches, the quiet evenings together, and realized that all of it was now being questioned, the bond they had built suddenly under threat, and James's eyes, usually warm and reassuring, were now distant, searching for answers that she could not give in the moment, and he whispered, his voice low and full of hurt, "How could you hide this from me for so long?" And each word cut into her like glass, leaving traces of pain that she had not anticipated, and she tried to respond, to tell him that she had loved him, that he had been the father Lily needed in every way that mattered, that nothing about their life together had been a lie, that every bedtime story, every hug, every laugh shared had been real and full of love, but the words seemed to falter, tripping over the weight of the secret itself, and James's face hardened as he struggled to reconcile the life he thought he knew with the reality now revealed. And the house, once filled with warmth and laughter, seemed suddenly too large, too cold, filled with the echoes of what could no longer exist in the same way, and Clara's eyes filled with tears, blurring the lines of the room, blurring the memory of the man she loved, the man who had been everything she had hoped for, while James turned, his shoulders stiff, his jaw tight, moving toward the door with deliberate speed, and she felt a chill settle in her chest as he paused, glanced briefly back, with eyes that spoke of heartbreak, anger, and disappointment, then left without another word, the door closing behind him with a finality that made her knees weak, and in that moment, Clara felt the emptiness of the home around her, the quiet that replaced the sound of his presence, the absence of his voice, the void where laughter and warmth used to be, and she sank onto the couch, holding Lily close, feeling the tiny body against hers, the innocence of the child who had no part in the storm now raging between the adults she loved, and she whispered soothing words to her daughter, words of love and comfort, even as her own heart shattered, realizing that the next days would be filled with silence, unanswered questions, and the looming shadow of what had been revealed, and she thought of James walking through the empty streets, imagining the confusion and hurt that mirrored her own, wondering if he would ever forgive her, wondering if he could ever see that her love had been true, and she recalled the nights they had spent dreaming of the future, the plans they had made together, the promises spoken quietly in the dark, and now all of it felt fragile, like glass teetering on the edge of a table, ready to fall and shatter into irreparable pieces, and yet, amid the heartbreak, Clara felt a spark of determination, a quiet resolve that she would not let this secret destroy the love that had once been so real, that she would find a way to heal, to explain, to bridge the chasm that had opened between them, even if it took months, even if it took years, she would try, because love, even when tested by betrayal, by hidden truths, by heartbreak, still had the power to endure, and as she held Lily in the dim light of the living room, she whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else, "We will survive this, my loves. Somehow, we will find a way," knowing that the road ahead would be painful, knowing that tears and anger and silence would come, but also knowing that hope, fragile as it was, could grow, and that maybe one day, James would return not just to the home, but to the family, to the love that had always been waiting for him, and until that day, she would hold her daughter, remember the love they had shared, and prepare for the challenge of reconciling hearts that had been wounded, hearts that needed understanding, forgiveness, and a chance to love again despite everything that had been revealed. Days turned into nights, and Clara found herself moving through the house in a quiet haze, the rooms echoing with the absence of James, his presence now just a memory that clung to every corner, every piece of furniture, and she often paused in doorways, imagining him returning, imagining the words he might say, imagining his hand reaching for hers, and the longing that filled her chest was both painful and sustaining, because despite the heartbreak, she could not erase the love that had once been so deep, and Lily's laughter, bright and pure, was the only sound that kept her grounded, a reminder that life still carried moments of joy even in the shadow of loss, and Clara found herself speaking to her daughter in hushed tones, telling her stories at bedtime, smoothing her hair, holding her a little longer, trying to fill the void left by James, yet every time she looked at the doorway or caught a glimpse of his empty chair, she felt the sharp ache of absence, and she remembered all the small moments they had shared as a family, the dinners together, the walks in the park, the bedtime rituals, and those memories made the emptiness feel heavier because they were reminders of what had been lost and might never return, and she thought of the text messages left unsent, the conversations avoided, the truths held back for fear of hurting him, and she realized that even her careful love, her attempts to protect him, had contributed to the fracture now separating them, and nights became the hardest time, when silence pressed against the windows, when Lily slept and the house was still, and Clara found herself awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering if James's heart was as heavy as hers, wondering if he thought about her, if he missed the sound of Lily's laughter, if he regretted the choices made in haste, if he would ever forgive the secret, if love could survive beyond the pain, if their bond, once so strong, could be rebuilt, and she caught herself imagining him in different scenarios, walking alone in the rain, looking lost, or sitting quietly in a coffee shop, staring at a cup of tea he didn't want to drink, and each thought both comforted and tormented her because it meant he was still out there, still living, still human, still capable of returning, yet also meant he was not here with them, not yet, and the longing that filled her heart made her ache in ways she hadn't expected, making her feel fragile, exposed, and deeply alive all at once, and Clara also wrestled with guilt, knowing that the secret, while hidden out of fear and love, had caused the very distance she now felt, and she replayed every moment in her mind, wondering if there had been signs, if there had been ways to ease him into the truth, if there had been conversations she should have had sooner, if the timing, the circumstances, could have been different, if her careful plans to protect him and Lily had been foolish, and the whirlwind of emotions left her exhausted, yet she could not stop caring, could not stop hoping, and even in the quietest hours, she felt the pull of love that had not yet faded, a tether to James that refused to break, and she began to plan, silently, not yet daring to act, but imagining the ways she could reach him, the ways she could show him that her love had never wavered, that Lily's presence did not diminish his place in their hearts, that they could survive this heartbreak if only he would open the door and listen, if only he would see the depth of her remorse and the steadfastness of her devotion, and she thought of all the little things that had once brought them joy, the jokes, the shared glances, the quiet moments of understanding, the times when a single touch conveyed more than words, and she held on to those memories like lifelines, hoping that someday they could become the foundation for healing, and each day she lived in the house became a mix of tender care for Lily and a quiet struggle against despair, and the nights stretched longer, with Clara lying awake listening to the soft breathing of her daughter, imagining James somewhere out there, thinking, feeling, grappling with his own heartbreak, and she whispered into the darkness, sometimes aloud, sometimes in her heart, I hope you remember us, James. I hope you remember the love we shared, the life we built, the laughter, the warmth. I hope you come back, and though she feared he might never return, though she feared the silence might never break, she also felt a tiny spark of hope flicker inside her chest, a spark she nurtured each day, knowing that love, even when wounded, even when tested by secrets and silence, had the power to endure, and that as long as Lily smiled, as long as her heart beat, as long as she remembered the love that had once filled their home, she would wait, she would prepare, she would care, and she would hope, because sometimes, hope itself was the most powerful expression of love, and she believed that maybe, just maybe, the day would come when the door would open, when James's eyes would meet hers again, when they could sit together, talk through the pain, forgive the past, and allow love, tender and scarred, to blossom again. And until that day, Clara held Lily close, cherished each laugh, each hug, each whispered, I love you, Mommy, and she moved forward, one careful step at a time. Carrying heartbreak and hope together, learning to live in the space between loss and possibility, waiting for the moment when hearts could be mended, and love could once again feel whole. Weeks passed in a blur of quiet days and long, lonely nights, and Clara found herself adjusting to a life that felt both familiar and foreign, the walls of her home still echoing with the absence of James, the rooms carrying the memories of laughter and love, yet now tinged with a fragile ache that never fully left her chest, and each morning she woke to Lily's bright smile, the tiny hands clutching her own, the Innocence of her daughter a constant reminder that life continued even when hearts were broken, and Clara often caught herself glancing at the door, imagining James walking through it, imagining the moment when words could be exchanged, explanations given, tears shed, and perhaps even forgiveness found. Yet she also feared the distance he had created, the wall of anger and hurt that seemed insurmountable, and she thought of the day a letter arrived, not in the form of anger, not in the form of cold legal words, but with a mix of both, sent from a lawyer, outlining the steps James was taking, the legal counsel he had sought, and the plans to protect himself, to create space, to process the shock that had shattered their lives, and Clara's heart sank at first, the formal language of separation and protection cutting into her like a blade, leaving her reeling. Yet within the pages, folded carefully and tucked in a small envelope, she found a note in James's handwriting, familiar and fragile, almost hidden among the legal text, and her hands trembled as she unfolded it, her eyes scanning each word, feeling the rush of emotion that came with reading the lines. I need time, but I haven't forgotten what we had. I'm lost without you both, and in that moment, a wave of conflicting feelings crashed over her, relief, longing, heartbreak, hope, guilt, and love, all mingling together in a storm she could not yet fully understand, and she held the note close to her chest, letting the paper press against her heart, imagining James somewhere alone, thinking of her and Lily, struggling with the same emotions she carried every day, wondering if the distance, the absence, the pain, could ever be bridged, and she thought of the nights when they had whispered promises in the dark, when they had held each other close, when love had seemed unbreakable, and she realized that even though their lives had shifted in ways neither of them expected, the bond they had shared had not been erased, had not disappeared, had not been replaced, and she felt a cautious spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, hearts that had been wounded could still find their way back to each other, and she began to imagine the day when James would return, when the walls of silence would be broken, when words could be spoken, tears could fall freely, hugs could be exchanged, and love could be rebuilt, and she allowed herself to dream quietly of that moment, imagining the conversations, the apologies, the explanations, the laughter that might come after long nights of tension, imagining Lily running into his arms, her small voice calling for him, imagining the reunion that might heal all the small and large fractures their lives had endured, and she felt the warmth of that thought, a light in the midst of lingering sorrow, a promise that life, though tested, still had the capacity to bring hearts back together, and in those weeks, she moved carefully, nurturing Lily's days with laughter, love, and attention, creating memories that could not be broken by absence, teaching her to be resilient, teaching her the quiet strength that comes from facing challenges with courage, and yet, all the while, carrying James's words like a fragile thread tying their hearts together, a thread she held onto fiercely, refusing to let it fray, refusing to let hope disappear, and each night, as Lily drifted off to sleep, Clara would sit by her bedside, stroking her hair, whispering softly, "We will be okay. I promise." Love can survive even the hardest storms, and she would imagine James somewhere out there, thinking, feeling, struggling, and she allowed herself to believe that love, true love, had a way of returning, even when tested by secrets, absence, and heartbreak, and she pictured the day when their eyes would meet again, when forgiveness could be offered, when the bond they had once cherished could be mended, and she clung to that vision, nurturing it quietly as she prepared herself for the journey ahead, a journey of patience, understanding, and courage, because she knew that some love, though wounded, could endure, and that even when hearts are broken and the world seems against you, the power of hope, forgiveness, and steadfast care could guide two souls back together, and in the quiet moments, when the house was still and the night pressed softly against the windows, she would close her eyes, feel Lily's small heartbeat against hers, and whisper to the universe, to James, to the unseen future, "I will wait. I will love. I will believe. We will find each other again," knowing that this was the strength that would carry her through, that this was the love that would not fade, and that somehow, in the delicate balance of heartbreak and hope, of absence and longing, of love tested and love enduring, their family could one day be whole again, stronger than before, shaped by trials, healed by honesty, and guided by the unbreakable ties of heart and home.